Well, what do you do when it's 95 degrees and with the humidity it's 105 field temperature? I'll tell you what you don't do. You don't go out in the woods trying to take pictures. You don't get on your Soho e-bike and try to ride the trails. It's just too hot. So what do? Well, you make lumber. Let me show you. Let me turn the camera around. You make lumber. What do I mean? I mean, you don't make wood, you make lumber. You save all your scraps, which is what I do. I save all my scraps, and I have a big bin over there, as you can see, with a whole bunch of scraps. And I pull out all the scraps that are of any size at all, and I make lumber out of them to make picture frames. And let me show you what I mean. Now this first board, as you can see, that's a strip of walnut, there's a strip of maple, there's a strip of white oak, that's cherry, that's alder, and there's another strip of white oak. And what I do, I found pieces that were all about the same length. That was my first board, and I glue them together and I make a board. I'll split this board down the middle and I'll make picture frames from it. I got that idea at Hobby Lobby. I was looking at picture frames, 4 ideas, and I had saw where they had taken scraps of wood and they were using finger joints like this and putting those little scraps together to make frames, and they looked really neat. But they were using all the same kind of wood. I'm using different kind of woods just for the effect. Now the first board, like I said, was easy because all these pieces were the same length. This second board was a little more difficult. These were all the same width, but they were little short pieces. They weren't all the same length, as you can see. Okay? So that was a little more difficult, like putting together a puzzle. Well, by the time I got down to this board, I didn't even have pieces that were the same width. And I had to go in and put little strips, like you see that little strip of walnut right here, trying to fill the gaps and the spaces. So that was a lot more difficult to put together. So then, when I got down to where I didn't have much of anything left, I started milling down the pieces to the same size, or the same width anyway, before I started putting them together. Now I still got a lot of different pieces, but you know, on this edge, all these are the same width on this edge, and then the ones in the center I milled down to where they were all the same width. So it makes it easier, not such a puzzle. All these I'll split right down the middle on the table saw, and that will be my picture frames. It'll be about 1 1/4 to 1 3/8 wide. Now I'm not going to show you how I make my frames. There's no big secret there. There's a formula for making frames if you're interested. It's real simple. It'd be the width and length of the mat plus 2 times the width of the frame plus 1/8 inch. Otherwise, if you're making 11 by 14 frame, it'd be 11, and say the frame was 1 inch wide, so it'd be 11 inches plus 2 times the width, so it'd be plus 2 inches, 1 inch for each side, plus 1/8. So it'd be 11, and 2 is 13 and 1/8. Then the 14 would be 16 and 1/8. It's a real simple formula, and it works out every time. So I'm going to get busy and split this up, And I'm not going to show you what I'm doing. There's no need. It's just a matter of putting it on the table saw and sawing it up. But if I do something halfway at all intelligent, why, I'll stop and show you what I'm doing. Alright? Alright, what I'm doing now is I got the frames finished. As you can see, there's a couple of them here. And what I've been doing is putting splines, that's these little dark things, in the corners. Now I do that because, whoops, get that out of the way, because these corners are just glued, and that's ingrain. You know, ingrain looks like that. That's the end of the board. And ingrain is very, very weak joint when glued, so you have to do something to strengthen it. And what you do, you put in splines like these. And that's what I'm doing. Now, over here, we go to the table saw. This is a spline jig. And you put the frame, you're going to cut the spline in this, and then you push it through your saw, and it cuts a groove. And then you take a little piece of wood, a piece of hardwood of some kind, and you put it in that groove in the corner. Now, I'm going to set up here and show you what it looks like. So just hang on. Alright, this is a completed frame, but there's no spline. Okay? So you put the frame in the jig like this. You get it centered, which it pretty well is right now. Tighten down the clamp so to hold it, and you turn the saw on and you push it through. I'm going to get my headphones on and I'm going to run it through. Alright, you got your headphones on? I got mine on. There you go. It makes a notch in the corner. Now I'll stick a piece of wood in that and glue it, and then I have a good strong corner. So now I'm going to go around and do the other 3 corners on this frame. Doing that, you want to always keep your frame oriented the same way so that they look the same, that they're symmetrical. Alright, well, I got 2 more frames to do. Okay, I've got the splines in now, as you can see, got them roughed in. And I'll take it over to the bandsaw, trim them, then I'll take a chisel and trim them down smooth. So that's what's up next. Now, I always go to the back side and I put a pin. I don't know if you can see the pins or not, but I put a pin in there to hold the in case it's fitting just a little loose. It's got something more than just the glue to hold it. Okay, I've got them trimmed down as close as I dare with the bandsaw. Now you take a sharp chisel and you finish trimming them off. You want to keep your hand, this hand, out of the way of the chisel. If the thing slips, you really cut yourself. Because the end of this chisel is razor sharp. You just kind of slowly work it down. And when you get it down where it's smooth, which is not quite smooth yet. Just take a little sanding block, piece of sandpaper. There you go. There's a spline. And that's what it looks like, and that's how it's done. Now the technique with your chisel, you're not chiseling, you know, like boom, 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 like that. What you're actually doing, you're slicing. If you'll notice, I put a chisel up here on the corner, and then I just put pressure on it, and then I push it across with my thumb. So actually what you're doing is you're slicing. You're not really chiseling. Before, if you're making picture frames or making any kind of a splice, before I trim the splice, I'd practice on something, getting this technique down. Because it's real easy to gouge into this wood instead of just slicing off part of the chisel or part of the splice. You know, you got to have just the right angle. You'd think, well, if I just make it flat. Well, you can't, because you can't slice so well that way. So you got just a slight angle on it. And then you get a nice smooth splice just like that. Sometimes when you're putting in your spline, it'll chip off on the end here. What do you do with that? Well, you need to fill it with some wood filler. Now, my favorite kind of wood filler is Roberts. And the reason I like Roberts is because it comes in multiple colors. I have about 5 different colors that I use. Here's a different Roberts wood, laminate, and vinyl putty. This one is gray, dark brown, brown, light, and then tan, like this. And you can mix these, like if you got a kind of a gray piece of wood, you can't really tell, well, kind of tell. This is kind of gray looking. You can mix the gray and like the tan, and you can get a very similar color. So there we go. That's what I use. And you can use just about all that's in the tube. Now what I mean by that, Elmer's and other brands, you use about half the tube and you can't get the stuff out of the tube. It won't squeeze out. You can stick nails down in there and try to pull it out and stuff like that, but it won't come out. It forms a vacuum or something in there and it won't let it come out. So you wind up throwing half the tube away. So I like Roberts because you can get better use out of it, and it comes in colors. Now, spline here chipped off on the end. If I use the walnut, which is what I want to use, why, it'll stain this wood. So what do? You can do one of two things. You can put masking tape on there and mask around it and fill it, or you can take a can of shellac and just spray it. And it'll dry in just a couple of minutes. Then you can put it on there, but it won't stain where the shellac is. The shellac works as a barrier, cover it up. It's almost dry. I'll wait till it gets dry, then we'll look at it. Okay, I've got just a little crack there where I put in my spline on one end. Now I sprayed that with shellac. I put a little filler on there. And I just take my finger and smear it into the crack. I always rub across the crack. Okay. Take a wet rag the crack is filled, and because of the shellac, it didn't stain the rest of the wood, because it will stain it and you can't get it off. Let me show you. I'll take a piece of wood here. This is a light colored wood. You wouldn't want dark on it. There's no shellac on it. I'll put a little dot there. Say that was a crack. I'll rub it in. Now go to wipe it off. Look what it does. And you can't get that off. It's in the grain. You can't get it off. It's just there. So that's the way you fill the cracks. A little shellac. You don't stain your wood. Another little trick you can do is use wood grain filler for light wood. So if you've got a dark spline and it's on light wood, you can go in and you can, especially oak, because oak, the grain is so coarse. So you go in and you fill the grain first. This doesn't tend to color it or anything. And I'll tell you another thing, when you're using oak, if you use wood grain filler like this to fill the grain, well, you'll get a very smooth finish. Now, you want to wipe across the grain, otherwise you wipe it right back out. Then if you use dark wood filler, why, it won't darken the grain pores. Okay, I've sanded them down with 320. Then I used a tack cloth to wipe them down, make sure I get all the dust off of them. And now I'm going to put a neutral stain on them. I don't want to use a colored stain because the wood's all different. All I want to do is show the different grains in the wood, and this will really bring it out. And to do that, I'm just using an old rag. There's no use. Well, you can see how well you can see that in the video, but it really brings the grain out, but it keeps the natural look of the wood, and that's all we're trying to do. Yeah, real easy. This should dry at least for an hour or two before you put your final finish on there, which I'll be using a semi-gloss polyurethane. But, you know, there's nothing to this. It's real easy. And as you can see, it really makes the splines pop. Which adds a little character to the frame. Okay, well, I'm going to finish this up. Kind of wipe it on, and then you take a dry cloth and wipe it off after a time. Don't want to leave it on too long, it tends to get sticky. That's all there is to it. Alright, it's been an hour and they're pretty dry. I'm going to use some polyurethane. I just use an old piece of t-shirt or something. I'll just wipe it on. There's nothing to it. If you want wipe on poly, you can pay 20 bucks for a pint, or you can get regular poly and dilute it yourself for about $12 a quart. So just dip it in and then just wipe it on. And I would rather use or do 3 or 4 thin coats as to try to get it on with a brush on 1 or 2 coats. Seems like it always leaves brush marks or something that you don't want. You want a nice smooth finish. Normally I'd use a semi-gloss, but I'm going to try the gloss just to see how well it works, and I can always sand it just a little bit and put semi-gloss over the top of it, and it'll look like semi-gloss. So this is easy. This is the fun stuff. And I always let this dry overnight, and then a light sanding with some 320 or some 4/0 steel wool before I put the next coat on. That's what it looks like. Well, I'm going to do the rest of them. Okay, the first coat has dried. Now you want to lightly sand with some 220 or 320 paper, just to stuff it up a little bit so the next coat will stick. Okay, here they are, all done. All waxed, polished, ready to go. I think my next video is going to be a trail ride on a Soho bike. In the meantime, with all the new subscribers I have, let me know what you'd like to see in the way of videos. You know, got kind of an eclectic channel here. Photography, mountain biking, trail riding, woodworking, and I have another channel called Cultural Corner, where we talk about the cultural issues of the day. So check me out, share, subscribe if you like the channel, and ring the bell if you want notifications when I put up a new video. Hey, thanks for watching. Catch you on the rebound. God bless America.